Good morning. Everything before lunch is morning, I guess. I was asked to follow the question what the increasing use of AI also in the book business and particularly in publishing means for publishing education. We as a publishing studies course in Germany are of course by far not the only educators for publishing business jobs, even in Germany, but we are one of them because a lot of our alumni go to the book business and they are will be confronted with AI there. And I will follow up the question what this means for what we do. Works. I will show you one slide because we don't have to discuss what AI is, but we should have a common understanding. Then I will give you a few glimpses of most of it you know anyhow about the situation of the use of AI in our industry, and I will give you two slides in the beginning which are sort of theoretical, but you will see it's not that bad. Meaning, if we look at the industry and see how far the progression of AI has come, then we would have to know what the whole is. I mean, what are the tasks in publishing business, and I will present you two approaches to that, and then with ending with a short remark on large language models because they have stirred up the discussion a lot since last autumn. And then we see the situation. We have the large language models and all the other large models also for visuals. Then the question is, if this development goes on in a speed like this or even faster, what does this mean for the specific role of humans, particularly, of course, in the publishing business? And if we have an idea how the future role of humans in the publishing business will be, then we also know that will be the next topic, what the education of future publishing business people should look like, or at least for the time being, that's only a proposal. We have to discuss it. It's moving targets wherever we look, but that's going on. And even if we have discussed that and to come to some conclusion, we know that there are a couple of problems around which are not connected AI directly, or they are connected indirectly, so we have to keep track of them separately. So with respect to artificial intelligence, I think if we can use the common understanding, colloquially, the term artificial intelligence is used to describe machines that mimic cognitive functions that humans associate with other human minds, such as learning and problem solving. I guess you agree. And even if you look at that, of course, the border between AI systems and intelligent software systems of other kinds is blurry, of course. We are now talking about systems, mainly these large trained models, which are based on the neural network approach. And that's one of the oldest ones, but had disappeared for decades. It is now the dominating one, but it's still not the only one. And the interesting thing is that the attempts of, for example, OpenAI to keep sort of control of what the effect of learning in ChatGPT 3 does is probably rule-based. So ChatGPT 3 would like to give you an answer, for example, how to build a bomb, but there is a rule-based system above it which said, you know it, but don't tell it to the customer, which gives us an impression because before ChatGPT 3, most of the very potent AI systems were combinations of different approaches, namely the neural network one, the statistical one, and the rule-based ones anyhow, and that probably will come back. Is, for example, true for Watson by IBM. Now, the large language models have appeared, and the difference, I will give you a few examples of AI applications in the publishing business, only a few, and some of them you might know, but those are typically applications for a certain task. The new thing with respect to large language models is that they at least are in the direction of general AI. That means you can do different things with them. You can have text checked with them. You can have marketing text formulated. So that's a completely different world. And the potential of these systems definitely looks mind-blowing. On the other hand, there are different levels of fears from malign uses of these systems. We have examples of that almost every day. But there are also a bit less concrete fears that these systems will take over the world. And then, of course, there are fears, and this is much more connected to what I will talk about, fears for people losing jobs, because the new situation of this kind of digitization is that it hits mainly white-collar workers. It's not so much related to what builders or waiters do. It's related to what tax advisors and judges do, and professors and all the rest. So the situation in our industry, if we want to see what happens in our industry, I usually use this model by Janello. He says we have a value network and things like that, and he has defined what happens in this value network. For example, the creation of content, the selection of content, the decision about marketing, and so on. According to a scholar, which might be known to some of you, Michael Baska, he says that the core of publishing is filtering, framing, and amplification, meaning publishing starts with selecting the right content. He calls filtering for differentiated reasons, but it's basically the same thing. Then a publisher decides on the framing, which means the content will be given the appropriate form, starting from digital or not digital to in what kind of series and all that. And then he has a play of mind saying, is, for example, leaving a manuscript on a park bench, is that publishing? And then you would probably say, no, of course not. And then he said, what about 1,000 manuscripts on 1,000 park benches? And what he insinuates is that this is also not amplification. Part of amplification is that the publisher is interested that as many, that more copies will be bought/read than would have been without amplification. Otherwise, he says it's not amplification. And all that is, and exactly the point, if you're interested to that more people read your book, that can have very different reasons, for just earning money to, if you're Jehovah's Witnesses, as many people reading that as possible, completely different. Now let me give a couple of examples. This is a very groundbreaking one because, and it was done before the large language models, namely in 2019. This is the first of a series of books which goes into Springer Nature's database, looks for the content, clusters it, and actually makes a book out of it. They have published a few more of them, but typically what they now do, they have this program run, and then the pre-manuscript they give to human authors to check, which makes the process much faster and better readable. Then you know those products that help the editorial process and the filtering, as it were, by, for example, attributing the genre to a digital manuscript. And in fact, on the basis of a learning process of all the digital files of the German bestsellers of the last years, how they managed to get them, I don't exactly know. But then it also gives you a potential readership for every single book. And by the way, this is also a system which combines very different approaches to AI. And it's not only machine learning with neural networks, but also rule-based stuff. For example, we know that no book is successful the average sentence length of which is longer than 17. That's something you can't do with machine learning, but that's just rule-based. And there's much more. There are AI-written children's books, as presented in Bologna, for example. There were a lot of discussions in Bologna also about AI-generated children's books, and mainly the fears of the illustrators. And for example, the fears and the anger that their copyright has been destroyed because what the results of their work that had been published on the web are, of course, part of the learning material for all these machines that now produce illustrations. And there's a lot of machine translation and machine-assisted translation, certainly not in literary fiction, but in less complex genres. And then there are a couple of AI applications which are not so much oriented to the core business related to content of publishing houses, but for example, with respect to pricing. Based on pricing activities of ebooks in the past years, Bookwire, for example, can suggest a pricing activity. It should be 4 weeks long, and it should be $3.99 instead of $2.99. And be aware there is holidays in some states and all the rest. And also AI supported social media marketing. I think we have heard something about that already. That's, of course, not specific to the publishing business, but happens in every consumer, and not only even consumer business. And the same is somewhere in between is the AI-supported ebook reader intelligence, of which we assume Amazon does it. And there are also available systems by other companies which offer their services to publishing houses. And then, of course, there are a lot of a few AI systems on the side of the customer. They are in some way part of the value chain, but not under the control of the publishing houses, but fully under the control of the reader. For example, Read.o, mainly with machine learning, they evaluate the consumer comments on certain books. And from that, they give it a profile. Is it erotic, unerotic? Is it humorous? Is it serious? And so on. And then if you have liked the book, then you get these sliders and you can say, I would like to read something like that, only a bit less erotic and a bit more humorous. And then it will propose something to you. Now, if this fast development, particularly the acceleration caused by the large language models will go on, what will be the specific role of humans? The first thing I will present here, you just have to believe, and you can even pause if you like. We have gone through what the task of a publisher is according to Janello and Baska, as I've presented to you. And we had a look of where there are digital or AI systems to support publishing work. And especially we have recognized that there are some areas in the value chain where there aren't any AI systems. So the first assumption would be, or could be, there are no AI systems because the task is so complicated that an AI can't possibly do that sensibly. And what we have found, what we have concluded from that is if there is a stable core of publishing activity, it probably is to develop a recognizable identity of a publishing house or an imprint in connection with a marked, comprehensively, or at least perceptibly coherent set of published content. And you probably don't have an example, I guess, of an AI system doing that. And for example, things like qualification, Lisa by qualification, relies on the fact that someone sends in manuscript. But of course, you don't want to develop the profile of a publishing house only on manuscripts you get sent in randomly, sort of. So if you actively discover and identify further corresponding content or even further corresponding authors, then that's something I at least don't know any AI application. Certainly evaluating and filtering is still a task, and as I have said, there are systems which sort of do that. What in fact they do, they probably negatively sort out about 50%. You don't have to look manually or intellectually, but that's about it. More these systems can't do, especially if you want to do ambitious products and literature, then of course they typically are not only more of the same, and those systems of course can only relate what they get with what has been there in the past. And if they say that's okay, that's nothing else than saying that's more of the same. And then, of course, if you have content, for example, then to decide for which target group that is and what that means for framing, is something I don't know any AI system for either. For example, is this a material that should be published audio or digital or via social media to 19 to 25-year-old readers, or is this something you could persuade baby boomers about? These are things that also would remain with humans. And then I won't go in the discussion. Then, of course, you know from the art section discussions about AI that there are repeating terms where they say this is a kind of task only a human can do. For example, to set goals, develop ideas from scratch, which are not more of the same, negotiate compromises and all the rest, but we won't go into that. So if this is true, that there are remaining, that the situation is as positive as that there are certainly core tasks which can only be handled professionally and effectively by humans, then the question is, what does this mean for publishing education? And the first question is, why do we care? Well, we care. If I look at you, I know that the first position is exactly why you are here, because we want to help to make the world a better place, or at least prohibit it becoming a worse place. But on the other hand, we are also interested, of course, to sustain an industry, and that's perfectly okay, and the people working in it, and then we go back to the situation to point one, because we see publishing as a decisive force in healthy democratic knowledge societies, so that there are more than one reason to cater for the future of humans in workflows in publishing, which also include AI systems. We would say we have been talking about AI in the past, but not so much systematically. So what the idea now is, apart from what we have done previously, what would we suggest to be done in publishing education? I would have to say in academic publishing or scholarly publishing education, but most of that is probably also true for publishing education outside universities. And for example, one thing is to convey basic knowledge about AI, and this, of course, is not a purpose in itself, because doing that and, for example, having an idea what neural networks can do and deep learning and large language models, it will also tell you what they can't do. And for example, as you know from people talking to you or even trying large language models, what they can't do, they try, but can't do really, is to certainly make sure that the source of what has been the basis of a text is referenced. They can't do that. That's one thing. Another thing is, for example, the DeepL, Google Translate, also neural network-based machine learning translation, has a few shortcomings you can't do anything about. For example, is that if you want to have a consistent wording of some concepts as a company, as an institution, this can't be done by machine translation. And for example, machine translation based on neural networks has a lot of problems with negation. So for example, A is true or not A is true doesn't make much of a difference. And if you look at, for example, prescriptions or something to do with nuclear power station, then not or not may make much of a difference, which is definitely a border for machine translation. Then, this is new. For example, of course, we should have trained our students in the past to using, for example, elaborated content management systems, but don't tell anyone, we wouldn't have been able to afford a sensible content management system for students to be trained. But this is now much easier. Everyone can get access to Midjourney and to ChatGPT. We can give students, of course, access, and we can also do that with projects in a more guided way, and I will give you an example. And then, as you know, the quality of what large language models have as a result is very much dependent on the quality of what you enter. And the better you do it, the better the results are. And typically it's some kind of a dialogue, and it's called prompt engineering. And there is starting research, and there are white papers on LinkedIn saying what you have to make sure that what ChatGPT does has a higher quality than if you do it naively. If we participate in that for editorial usages, then of course we should afterward teach that to our students. A big problem which has not been solved whatsoever but only be tackled is that those models that are trained on content from the web, depending on different law regimes in different countries, are based on copyright violations in many cases. So we certainly have to teach about copyright, because as a publisher, you have to make sure that in any step of the value chain using large language models, no copyright regulations have been violated. And we have to do that because we know copyright is very important for our industry, but we still have to do it with some sort of proportion, because there are other worthwhile interests also with respect to, for example, scholarly publishing. I give you the keyword of open access and open science, that free access to the knowledge of the world is also something that's very important, and to weigh those two is something which requires thinking, and I think universities are probably the right place to do that. Then, if we think that maybe the work of an editor or the work of some editors in the future will be using a conversational AI like GPT 4, 5 or whatever, and we still want to attract ambitious young people, then the work with these machines has to be attractive. For this is it necessary that there is no double work, that the work with these machines is integrated in the workflows, that the interfaces look attractive and don't screw up your eyes, and so on. This is also certainly related to research, but maybe it's research including students. Then, of course, we can't do basic research, because basic research on machine learning particularly, or other areas of AI is, I mean, it's AI science, but that's at least as complicated as rocket science. So it's not on us to do that. But we could, and I will give you an example, bring in the positions of publishing industry, media industry, and so on. And then, of course, we sometimes have to have a look at book history. That's exactly what Bhaskar does. He said the publishing industry is an industry that had been in crisis from 1450, Gutenberg's times. And sometimes the patterns used to solve these problems can be an inspiration to find out how to solve the challenge of AI in publishing. And then this is a gray area where it goes into the direction of activism. For example, with respect to the American or US conglomerate offers of Microsoft and Meta and Google and so on, I think it is important for us as European publishers, European media companies, that there should be, as long as possible, the chance that there are also European large language models. And as you know, with Aleph Alpha from Heidelberg, for example, there are competitors with much smaller models and so on and so forth. But they have to be supported, because we don't want to be totally have to rely on those systems, because once they, for whatever reason, disappear, then all workflows crumble. And then we should also advocate the use of training data, because now the training data has been the web as a whole. And of course, the only the own data a publishing house has is much too small for learning. But if you allow those to be included in the training set without going to the databases there and with a higher ranking, for example, the quality, of course, is much higher. But typically, every statement is in the internet, and it's opposite also. This is not true for your own data, and yet the higher the ranking of your own data in the learning process, the better the results. And then, of course, as I said, advocate copyright. I'll give you an example. We had a workshop with Springer Nature in the spring this year, and with a couple of doctoral students from France and from Germany, together with 3 or 4 people, among them Henning Schönberger, who did the Iron Thingy battery book in 2019. We, using ChatGPT and GPT-4, I think Springer Nature had an access already to write a book. And the idea was to write a book of about 50 or 60 pages. And we came to the conclusion we should do something like, what does large language models, artificial intelligence in publishing mean for leadership and management in publishing houses? A bit self-referential. And we worked there, and we planned to polish that in a day or 2 with a couple of doctoral students, just to find out that the data set where all the working groups put their content were so chaotic that we couldn't use that. So now we decided on having a seminar in the winter semester, where we will start off again, and actually with some kind of retreat of 2 or 3 days in the end of the seminar, write a book which will then be produced to Springer Nature. Springer Nature's original idea was that to have it as a book, meaning with no additional metadata. My position was always, since those systems will change very rapidly, I think it would be better to make it a readable book, but also tell people how it has come to life, and, for example, give the prompts to them and exactly specify what the polishing was, and so on and so forth. This can still be a valuable book, but it will also be a book which is part of the history of using AI in publishing. This is another example. There is a large research project in Mainz going on. It's called TopML, trading off non-functional properties of machine learning, meaning if you have a machine learning system, then your main aim is, of course, that this machine learning system does what you like it to do, to decide or whatever. But there are a couple of non-functional properties which we would always require AI system to fulfill. One is fairness. This is the predictions of imprisoned people in the US. You have heard of this case. That is privacy. For example, if you have small training sets of patient data in medicine, then you have to make sure that the data of a single person that had the data of which had been fed in cannot be restored from the result. Then transparency, I mean, that's the main point. I should have started with that. Under the label of explainable AI, there's a lot of research going on, because that's exactly what large language models, for example, or other deep learning algorithm can't do. They can't give you a reason why they came to the conclusion. If this conclusion has a wide impact on people, then there is no way other than having these explanations. And then there's resource efficiency. You probably know that apparently the training of ChatGPT-3 cost about $2 billion only in electric energy, not talking about everything else with respect to the processors. And the reason and the thing now is that most of these non-functional objectives of AI systems, they are in some kind of conflict. So, for example, more transparency typically needs even more energy. And this research project, where we are part of on the application side, wants to suggest really, as I said, rocket science style mathematics/information science solutions to tackle those problems. Now, that was about, in the narrow sense, about publishing education, but there's also accompanying work in the network of publishers and other publishing education institutions where we could do something good. For example, we could help the industry to develop their job profiles mainly in the direction of core competencies and tasks. So ask them not to write job adverts where you can see that what is required by the people is exactly what a good AI system can do. That's not a good idea. And communicate, and we will come back to that on the panel, how exciting work in the industry is, even or particularly in times of AI. And there are a couple of remaining problems and other challenges that won't go away even if we meet this challenge. If we succeed in keeping all the people in the publishing industry in the industry by retraining them, then the productivity using AI system, of course, raises, which means there will be more products, which is not in itself a good idea, and, for example, might lead to a growing disorientation of customers. So a remedy would mean, so as AI people in the biosciences think of individualized medicine, we could have individualized media or publishing industry. So the industry is working on a huge number of titles in very low numbers. I can't discuss this here, and probably we should. This, of course, would mean that there would be, even in the book business, additional echo chambers and filter bubbles, because there would be no chance for you to talk about the book you have read because no one else has had the chance, or at least has bought this book. And then conglomeration certainly will not go away. In the contrary, since all these models, as I said, are by American mega companies, conglomeration will get worse. Censorship attacks on the freedom of speech won't go away. Challenges through climate change won't go away either, where, however, I could say that a research project like TopML at least tackle this problem. And there's an insufficient diversity in the industry and its products, and also that is at least tackled. Now let me come to the conclusions. AI applications in the book media system are a reality in different stages of the value network, from authoring via gatekeeping editing to e.g. predictive pricing and recommendation. And now there are the large language models, because all the other examples had been there before there were large language models. We have the need and also the opportunity to again sharpen what the core of publishing is, and to define job profiles around the least or the not automatable complex value contributions, for example, like developing the identity of a publishing house, look actively for authors and content for a publishing house, and also, of course, the confident use of AI algorithm. I think it's no point in saying we just don't use that. Another point is probably, at least for the time being, that had been mentioned in the past before, that of course it should be transparent to people if there had been an AI participation in the product. And for continuing publishing education, this is not just any additional application add-on, but probably should be a new focus. And that's probably not that important for this winter semester and next winter semester, but certainly on the long run. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much, Christoph. Yes, we are going to change the stage, but we have a few minutes. If anybody would like to address him any question about this thrilling issue of AI, how do you feel about that? Do you have any kind of fear? Because yesterday, a group of friends, we were having some drinks in a private art collection, and Part of the pieces were based on artificial intelligence, and I was explaining to one of our friends that sometimes one could feel a little bit distressed about how it's working, the whole issue. Okay, you don't want to make any question? Then I'll do one for you, Christoph. 5 years ago, we presented here a report on AI for the book industry, calling Hour. If I ask you, do you think that many things changed since the last 5 years regarding AI and book industry? You could say that you can identify some shifts in our opinion or the state of the art or anything about that?
I think so. Not necessarily in the core business, but certainly in a playful way. Even with small or medium publishing houses, you hear things like that. Of course, I try my marketing texts with ChatGPT, or of course, I check the translation of my marketing text using ChatGPT. This certainly has changed, and I think the awareness that there's no way around that. I mean, for example, Lisa by Qualifictions, many publishing houses probably sometimes quite rightly could say nothing for us, and we certainly will survive without that. But this has now changed, and the awareness, I mean, not even in the art sections of the newspapers, but also in the B2B magazines of the publishing industry, you find it everywhere. And many, especially young people, just try those systems for their specific tasks in the publishing houses. Typically, probably it's not filtering, and typically it's probably not the editing of ambitious content, but everything else, basically.
Okay. Now, a microphone, please, here. Edna Oka.
That was a great overview. I was really struck by when you referenced the opportunities for personalization. And I'm really curious if you could just go a little bit deeper and explain what vision you have for that, because I think that that's something I haven't heard discussed publicly, and I think it's a very interesting option for the publishing industry, how AI could personalize experiences for readers.
I think we could bring together two developments there. Nobody knows much about it, but there is talk that, for example, well, certainly Amazon observes all its ebook users, and they also try to find patterns when material is particularly attractive, and some of it they may even make even accessible to their self-publishing authors. So if you combine that, which is something like preemptive recommendation to authors, or to authors using a machine, then this might, if you look at the slider of Book O, for example, might lead to the fact that they have shortly, in about an hour or so, written a book which is particularly written for at least a very small target group.